Have you ever had someone you loved more than life itself turn around and stab you in the back so deeply that you questioned everything you thought you knew about family? Have you ever sat at your own dinner table, surrounded by people who should have been your safe harbor, only to realize they were circling like vultures waiting for you to fall? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Kathleen Reed, though most folks have called me Kathy for the better part of 70 years. I'm 73 years old, and I've lived through more heartbreak and triumph than most people see in 2 lifetimes. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband died in a factory accident when I was just 35. I worked 2 jobs to put them through college, sacrificed my own dreams so they could chase theirs, and built a comfortable life from nothing but determination and love. But this story isn't about my victories. This story is about the moment I learned that sometimes the people who know exactly where to stick the knife are the ones you handed it to yourself. What I'm about to tell you happened just 6 months ago, and it changed everything I thought I knew about motherhood, family, and the price of unconditional love. It's a story about betrayal so calculated and cruel that even now, as I speak these words, I can barely believe it happened to me. But it did happen, and maybe by sharing it with you, I can save someone else from the devastation I experienced. This is the story of how my own daughter tried to steal my dignity, my independence, and my future, all while convinced she was doing it out of love. This is the story of how I discovered that blood doesn't always make family, and how sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. The cranberry sauce was still warm in the serving dish when my world came crashing down around me. Thanksgiving 2024 will forever be etched in my memory as the day my daughter Jennifer decided to publicly declare me incompetent in front of my entire family. I had spent 3 days preparing for this dinner. 3 days of careful planning, grocery shopping, and cooking, because I wanted everything to be perfect. At 73, I still prided myself on hosting the family gatherings. My dining room table, the same oak one Robert and I had bought 42 years ago when we were newlyweds, was set with my grandmother's china and the good silver that only came out for special occasions. The house smelled like heaven that morning. Turkey roasting in the oven, sweet potato casserole bubbling away, green bean almondine ready to be warmed, and my famous pumpkin pie cooling on the kitchen counter. I had gotten up at 5 in the morning to make sure everything would be ready by 2 o'clock when my family arrived. This was my tradition, my gift to them, my way of showing love through food and hospitality. Jennifer arrived first with her husband Mark and their 2 teenage boys, Tyler and Brandon. She swept through my front door like she owned the place, immediately surveying everything with what I can only describe as a critical eye. She had started doing this over the past few months, this inspection routine, though at the time I thought she was just being helpful. "Mom, why is the temperature set so high in here?" she asked before even saying hello, walking straight to my thermostat. "It's nearly 80 degrees. That's not healthy for someone your age." I was stirring the gravy at the stove when she said this, and I felt my shoulders tense. "It's 74 degrees, Jennifer, and I'm comfortable. I was just cooking all morning, so it feels warm to me." She shook her head and adjusted my thermostat anyway. "We need to talk about getting you one of those programmable ones. You're wasting so much money on heating bills." Before I could respond, my son Michael arrived with his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. Then came my youngest, David, with his girlfriend Lisa. The house filled with voices and laughter, hugs, and the chaos I had always loved. About family gatherings. For a moment, I forgot about Jennifer's thermostat comment and lost myself in the joy of having everyone together. We gathered around the table, and I asked Michael if he would say grace as his father used to do. The words were beautiful, thanking God for family and abundance and the blessing of being together. As we said amen, I felt that familiar warmth in my chest that comes from being surrounded by the people you love most in the world. The first course went smoothly. Everyone complimented the turkey, the stuffing, the vegetables. My granddaughter Emma told me about her school play, and Tyler shared stories from his senior year of high school. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by requests to pass dishes and compliments on the meal. But I should have known Jennifer was watching me. She was always watching me now, though I hadn't yet understood why. About halfway through dinner, I excused myself to get the second bottle of wine from the kitchen. I had opened it earlier to let it breathe, and I knew it was sitting on the counter by the coffee maker. But when I walked into the kitchen, I couldn't immediately spot it. I stood there for just a moment, scanning the counter, and then remembered I had moved it to the dining room sideboard to make more space. When I returned to the table empty-handed, Jennifer was already watching me with that look. The look I would come to recognize as her building evidence for her case against me. "Where's the wine, Mom?" she asked, and there was something in her tone that made everyone else stop talking. "Oh, I moved it to the sideboard earlier. Let me get it." I retrieved the bottle and began refilling glasses, but I could feel the shift in the room's energy. Jennifer had created a moment out of nothing, and somehow everyone was now paying attention to my every move. 20 minutes later, I made my second mistake. My great-niece Sophie, Michael's daughter Emma, was telling us about her upcoming dance recital, and I asked her what type of dance she was performing. It was an innocent question, but apparently I had asked the same thing 15 minutes earlier, when she first brought up the recital. "Grandma Kathy," Emma said sweetly, "I just told you it's ballet, remember?" I laughed it off. "Of course, sweetheart. Grandma's got a lot on her mind with this big dinner." But I caught Jennifer exchanging a meaningful look with her husband Mark, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The third incident happened when I was clearing the main course dishes. I had picked up David's plate and was heading to the kitchen when I realized I had forgotten to grab the serving spoon from the green bean dish. I set David's plate back down to collect the spoon, and Jennifer immediately pounced. "Mom, you just picked up that plate. Are you feeling okay?" The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a satisfied family after a good meal, but the tense quiet that precedes something unpleasant. Everyone was looking at me now, and I could feel their concern like a physical weight. "I'm fine, Jennifer. I just forgot the serving spoon." But she wasn't finished. "You seem confused today. First the wine, then asking Emma the same question twice. Now this. Are you sure you're feeling all right?" I wanted to defend myself, to point out that these were the most minor things imaginable, the kind of small oversights that happen to everyone, when they're managing a complex meal for 9 people. But something in Jennifer's tone, something calculated and deliberate, made me pause. This wasn't concern. This was performance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm perfectly fine," I said firmly. "I'm hosting Thanksgiving dinner for 9 people. A few small mix-ups are hardly cause for alarm." Jennifer turned to address the entire table then, and this is when my humiliation became complete. "I think we need to talk about this as a family. I've been noticing things for weeks now. Mom's been getting confused more often, forgetting conversations we've had, repeating herself. Today just confirms what I've been worried about." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like I was suddenly under a microscope being examined for flaws. My own children were looking at me with expressions I had never seen before. Not quite pity, but something close to it. Evaluation. Assessment. They were measuring me, weighing my words and actions against Jennifer's accusations. Michael, bless him, was the first to speak. "Mom seems fine to me. She just cooked this entire meal perfectly. Everything's delicious. Everything's timed right. That doesn't sound like someone who's confused." But Jennifer was prepared for this. "That's exactly what I'm worried about, Mike. She's overcompensating, pushing herself too hard to seem normal. Look at how exhausted she is. Look at how thin she's gotten. I wasn't thin. I had lost maybe 5 pounds since my last doctor's visit. Well, within normal range for someone my age. But Jennifer made it sound like I was wasting away. David joined the conversation then, and I could see the concern creeping into his voice. Mom, maybe Jennifer has a point. Maybe you should see Dr. Morrison, just for a checkup. There's nothing wrong with me that requires a doctor, I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. I'm 73 years old, not 93. I cooked this entire meal. I manage my own household. I balance my own checkbook. I drive myself wherever I need to go. A few minor moments of distraction during a busy day don't make me incompetent. But Jennifer wasn't finished building her case. Remember last month when you called me 3 times asking if I was coming to dinner on Sunday? And the week before that when you couldn't remember where you put your car keys and we found them in the refrigerator? The car keys. I remembered that day clearly. I had been carrying a bag of groceries in one hand and my keys in the other when I answered the phone. While talking to my neighbor about her upcoming surgery, I had absent-mindedly put the keys down while unpacking cold items into the refrigerator. It took me 10 minutes to find them, and yes, I had called Jennifer to ask if she had seen them. It was mildly embarrassing, but hardly evidence of cognitive decline. As for calling about Sunday dinner, I had no memory of calling her 3 times. But even if I had, couldn't that be explained by simple miscommunication? Maybe she hadn't confirmed clearly the first time, or maybe I had gotten distracted and forgotten to write it down. But sitting there at my own dining room table, surrounded by my children and grandchildren, these explanations felt weak even to me. Jennifer's certainty was powerful, and it was beginning to infect everyone else. I think, Jennifer continued, her voice taking on the tone she used when she was making business presentations, we need to start having some serious conversations about Mom's future, about whether it's safe for her to be living alone, driving alone, managing her finances alone. The room felt like it was spinning around me. My future? My finances? These were my decisions to make, not theirs. But suddenly my entire family was nodding along as if Jennifer was the voice of reason, and I was the confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. My daughter-in-law Sarah, Michael's wife, spoke up then. Maybe we could start small. Maybe someone could come. Check on you once a day, Mom Kathy. Just to make sure you're okay. Check on me? Like I was an invalid who couldn't be trusted to get through a day without supervision? I don't need anyone to check on me, I said, and my voice was sharper now. I've been taking care of myself and everyone else at this table for decades. I raised 3 children alone after your grandfather died. I worked 2 jobs to put them through college. I've managed my own life perfectly well for 73 years, and I don't intend to stop now. But Jennifer had an answer for this too. That's exactly the problem, Mom. You're so used to being independent that you can't see when you need help. Pride is keeping you from accepting that things are changing. Pride. She made it sound like a character flaw instead of the strength that had carried me through every challenge life had thrown at me. Tyler, Jennifer's 17-year-old son, looked uncomfortable with the entire conversation. Grandma, you seem fine to me, he said quietly. You helped me with my history paper last month, remember? About World War II? You knew more about it than my textbook did. I could have hugged him for that. At least someone at this table still saw me as capable, still valued my mind and my experience. But Jennifer shut him down immediately. That's different, Tyler. Grandma's memory for old things is still good. It's the new things, the day-to-day things that she's struggling with. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely participated. I sat there listening to my family discuss my life as if I wasn't in the room, as if I had already been declared incompetent and they were now just working out the details of my care. Jennifer dominated the discussion, presenting example after example of my supposed decline. Some of the incidents she described, I remembered differently. Others I didn't remember at all, which only seemed to prove her point in everyone else's eyes. By the time we got to dessert, the damage was done. My beautiful Thanksgiving dinner, the meal I had spent 3 days preparing with love and care, had become the backdrop for my public humiliation. My pumpkin pie, which usually drew raves from everyone, was eaten in relative silence. The easy conversation and laughter from earlier in the day had been replaced by awkward glances and careful words. When people started to leave, the goodbyes were different. Instead of the usual quick hugs and promises to call soon, everyone lingered. They hugged me a little too long, looked at me a little too closely, spoke to me a little too carefully. Michael asked 3 times if I was sure I was okay being alone for the evening. David offered to stay and help with the dishes. Even Mark, who usually barely spoke to me, told me to call if I needed anything at all. They were treating me like I was fragile, like I was already halfway to being the confused, helpless old woman Jennifer had painted me to be. Jennifer was the last to leave, and she made a point of pulling me aside privately. "Mom, I know today was hard, but I hope you understand that everything I said came from a place of love. I'm worried about you. We're all worried about you." I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised from birth, this person I had sacrificed everything for, and I saw a stranger. The Jennifer I knew was caring and protective, sometimes to a fault. But this Jennifer, the one standing in my hallway speaking to me like I was a child, felt different. There was something calculated about her concern, something that didn't quite ring true. "I'm fine, Jennifer," I said again, but the words felt hollow now, even to me. "I'm going to call Dr. Morrison on Monday and set up an appointment for you. A full physical and maybe some cognitive testing, just to establish a baseline, you understand, so we know where things stand." She was going to call my doctor, not ask me to call, not suggest that I might want to consider it, but actually make the appointment herself. The presumption of it took my breath away. "I can make my own doctor's appointments," I said. "I know you can, Mom, but I also know you won't. You're too stubborn, too proud to admit when you need help. So I'm going to help you whether you like it or not, because that's what daughters do for their mothers." After she left, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes and leftover food, and I cried. I cried for the Thanksgiving that had started with such hope and ended with such humiliation. I cried for the way my children had looked at me, like I was already lost to them. I cried for the future Jennifer was trying to impose on me. A future where I was managed and supervised and treated like someone who couldn't be trusted with her own decisions. But mostly, I cried because somewhere deep in my heart, I was starting to wonder if Jennifer might be right. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe the small oversights and momentary confusions that seemed so normal to me were actually signs of something more serious. Maybe the independence I valued so highly was just stubbornness, and maybe my pride was keeping me from seeing what everyone else could see clearly. That night, as I loaded the dishwasher and put away the leftover turkey, I found myself questioning every small action. When I couldn't immediately remember where I had put the aluminum foil, was that normal forgetfulness or evidence of decline? When I stood in the pantry for a moment trying to remember what I had come in there for, was that the kind of confusion Jennifer was talking about? The worst part was the isolation. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly alone. My children, the people who should have been my allies and advocates, had been turned into judges and evaluators. They were watching me now, measuring my words and actions against Jennifer's accusations, looking for signs of the incompetence she had convinced them to see. I went to bed that night feeling like a stranger in my own life. The woman who had raised 3 children alone, who had built a comfortable retirement from nothing, who had been the rock of her family for decades, had somehow become a problem to be solved. And the daughter I had loved and protected and sacrificed for had appointed herself as the solver. As I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I had shared with Robert for 23 years before his death, I made a decision. If Jennifer wanted to treat me like I was losing my mind, if she wanted to build a case for my incompetence, then I would prove her wrong. I would show everyone that Kathleen Reed was still sharp, still capable, still worthy of respect and independence. I had no idea then that proving Jennifer wrong would require me to discover truths about my daughter that would break my heart all over again. I had no idea that her concern for my welfare was hiding something much darker and more calculating than I could have imagined. I had no idea that my fight to maintain my independence would ultimately require me to do the hardest thing a mother can do. But that night, all I knew was that I wasn't ready to surrender my life to someone else's management, even if that someone was my own child. I wasn't ready to be treated like a problem instead of a person, and I wasn't ready to let Jennifer's version of reality become the truth about who I was and what I was capable of. The battle for my dignity had begun, and I was determined to win it. I just didn't know yet what victory would cost me. The weeks following Thanksgiving felt like living under a microscope. Every phone call from Jennifer began with careful questions about how I was feeling, whether I had eaten properly, if I remembered to take my vitamins. She started dropping by unannounced, claiming she was just in the neighborhood, though my house was 20 minutes out of her way from anywhere she normally went. At first, I attributed her increased attention to genuine concern. After all, she had expressed worry about my well-being at Thanksgiving, and perhaps she was simply following through on that concern. I tried to be patient with her questions, understanding that watching a parent age can be frightening for adult children. I had experienced similar fears when my own mother began showing signs of forgetfulness in her 80s. But there was something different about Jennifer's attention that I couldn't quite place. It felt less like concern and more like surveillance. She would arrive with her phone in hand, asking me seemingly innocent questions while recording my responses. "Just making voice memos for myself," she would explain when I noticed, "so I can remember what we talked about." The first time this happened, I was flattered. My daughter wanted to remember our conversations, to preserve them somehow. But as the weeks went on, I began to notice patterns in her questions. She would ask me to repeat stories I had told her before, then act surprised when the details varied slightly. She would bring up conversations we had supposedly had that I couldn't recall, then express concern when I couldn't remember them. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, Jennifer suggested we go through my important papers together. "Just to make sure everything is organized," she said. "In case something happens, we want to make sure we can find everything easily." I should have been suspicious then. I had always been meticulous about my record keeping. My filing system was clear and logical, with separate folders for insurance, medical records, financial statements, and legal documents. Everything was exactly where it should be, updated regularly, and easily accessible. There was no reason to think my papers were disorganized. But Jennifer insisted, and against my better judgment, I agreed. We spent an entire Saturday afternoon in my home office going through file after file. Jennifer asked detailed questions about every account, every policy, every investment. She took pictures of important documents with her phone, "for our records," she said. During this process, she made several comments that struck me as odd. When we came across my investment portfolio, she whistled softly and said, "Mom, I had no idea you had accumulated so much. You've been very smart with your money." When we reviewed my life insurance policies, she studied them carefully and asked several questions about the beneficiaries and payout amounts. At the time, I was proud that she recognized my financial acumen. I had worked hard to build security for my retirement, making careful investments and living below my means. For decades, Robert's life insurance and my own savings had grown substantially over the years, and I was comfortable knowing that I would never be a financial burden on my children. But Jennifer's interest felt invasive in a way I couldn't articulate. She seemed less impressed by my financial responsibility and more focused on the specific amounts and details. She asked questions about my monthly expenses, my healthcare costs, and my spending habits. She wanted to know if I had made any large purchases recently or given money to any charities. "I just want to understand your financial picture," she explained when I asked why these details mattered, "so we can help you make good decisions going forward." Help me make decisions. The phrase sent a chill through me. I had been making my own financial decisions successfully for over 40 years. Why would I suddenly need help now? The pattern continued in other areas of my life. Jennifer began commenting on my driving, suggesting that perhaps I should consider limiting my trips to essential errands only. She expressed concern about my evening activities, wondering if it was safe for me to attend my book club meetings that ended after dark. She questioned my choice to continue volunteering at the literacy center, arguing that it might be too much stress for someone my age. Each suggestion was presented as caring concern, but the cumulative effect was claustrophobic. I felt like I was being slowly wrapped in cotton batting, protected from every possible risk until I could barely move freely through my own life. The breaking point came during the second week of December. I had been looking forward to my annual Christmas shopping expedition to the mall with my friend Dorothy. We had been doing this together for 15 years, making a day of it with lunch and catching up on our families and mutual friends. It was one of my favorite traditions. Jennifer called the morning of our planned outing. "Mom, I don't think you should go to the mall today. The weather forecast shows possible snow, and the crowds will be terrible with Christmas so close. Why don't you just shop online instead?" I looked out my window at the clear, sunny sky. The weather forecast had mentioned a possibility of light snow in the evening, but nothing that would interfere with daytime activities. "Jennifer, it's a beautiful day, and Dorothy is picking me up in an hour. We've been planning this for weeks. I really wish you would reconsider. What if you get confused in the crowds? What if you can't find Dorothy? What if something happens and you can't remember where you parked?" Her questions irritated me more than they should have. "I've been navigating crowds and parking lots for 70 years, Jennifer. I think I can manage a trip to the mall." "But Mom, what if nothing?" I interrupted, my patience finally fraying. "I'm going Christmas shopping with my friend, just like I do every year. I'm not an invalid, and I'm not confused, and I don't need your permission to live my life." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice had changed. It was cooler, more distant. "I'm just trying to look out for you, Mom, but if you're going to be stubborn about it, there's nothing more I can say." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling shaken. The conversation had revealed something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Jennifer wasn't just concerned about my safety. She was trying to control my activities, to limit my independence in ways that had nothing to do with legitimate safety concerns. Dorothy and I had a wonderful day at the mall. We found perfect gifts for our grandchildren, enjoyed a leisurely lunch, and caught up on all the family news we had missed since our last visit. I navigated the crowds easily, remembered where we parked, and drove myself home without incident. It was exactly the kind of normal, pleasant day that Jennifer seemed determined to convince me I was no longer capable of having. But when I got home, there were 3 messages on my answering machine from Jennifer, each one more frantic than the last. The first asked me to call when I got home so she would know I was safe. The second expressed worry because I hadn't called yet. The third suggested that if I didn't call back within the hour, she would drive over to check on me. I called her. Immediately, more to prevent her from showing up at my door than out of any desire to continue our earlier conversation. "Thank goodness," she said when she heard my voice. "I was so worried. How did everything go?" I told her about my day, emphasizing how smoothly everything had gone and how much I had enjoyed the outing. But instead of being relieved, Jennifer seemed almost disappointed by my success. "Well, I'm glad it worked out this time," she said. "But Mom, you can't expect to be lucky forever. One of these days, something is going to happen. And then what?" One of these days, something is going to happen. The phrase haunted me after we hung up. Jennifer seemed to be waiting for me to fail, expecting me to prove her point about my declining capabilities. It was as if my success in managing my own life was somehow inconvenient for her. That night, I found myself reviewing the past few weeks with new eyes. Jennifer's increased attention, her probing questions about my finances, her attempts to limit my activities, her disappointment when I managed things successfully. A disturbing picture was beginning to emerge, one that I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. My daughter wasn't just worried about my well-being. She was building a case. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All those innocent questions, all those concerned suggestions, all those recorded conversations, they weren't expressions of love and care. They were evidence gathering. Jennifer was documenting every small mistake, every moment of confusion, every sign that could be interpreted as cognitive decline. But why? What could she possibly gain from proving that I was incompetent? The answer came to me slowly, piece by piece, as I remembered specific moments from our recent interactions. Her surprise at the size of my investment portfolio, her detailed questions about my insurance policies, her interest in my monthly expenses and spending habits, her suggestions about limiting my activities and managing my decisions. Money. It all came back to money. I spent the next few days in a state of stunned disbelief. Could my own daughter really be orchestrating a campaign to have me declared incompetent so she could gain control of my finances? It seemed impossible, too cruel and calculating to believe. But the more I thought about it, the more the pieces fit together. Jennifer had always been the most financially ambitious of my children. She had worked in corporate management for years, climbing the ladder steadily and earning a comfortable salary. But I knew from family conversations that she and Mark had overextended themselves with their lifestyle. They had bought a house they could barely afford, taken expensive vacations on credit, and accumulated debt that stressed their marriage. 6 months ago, Jennifer had mentioned in passing that Mark's company was downsizing and his job might be at risk. Around the same time, Tyler would be starting college in the fall, adding another financial burden to their already strained budget. Jennifer had seemed anxious about money in ways she had never been before. Had she looked at my comfortable retirement and seen a solution to her financial problems? Had she convinced herself that taking control of my assets was somehow justified by her belief that I was becoming incompetent? The thought made me sick to my stomach. I had raised Jennifer to be honest and ethical, to work hard for what she wanted rather than taking shortcuts. I had modeled these values throughout her childhood, working multiple jobs to provide for my family rather than looking for handouts or easy answers. But perhaps I had also made a mistake. Perhaps in my efforts to provide security for my children, I had sheltered them too much from financial struggle. Jennifer had never experienced the kind of desperate need that teaches you to find your own solutions. She had always known that her mother had resources, had always been able to fall back on my help when things got difficult. Maybe I had inadvertently taught her to see my assets as a family resource rather than my personal property. Maybe she genuinely believed that taking control of my finances would be in everyone's best interest, including mine. But even if her motives were partially altruistic, the method was inexcusable. The systematic undermining of my confidence, the public humiliation at Thanksgiving, the constant surveillance and questioning, these were the tactics of manipulation, not love. I decided to test my theory. Over the next week, I began paying closer attention to Jennifer's behavior, listening more carefully to her questions and comments. I also started keeping a journal, documenting each interaction we had and noting any patterns I observed. The results were disturbing. Jennifer called me every day, sometimes multiple times, always with questions designed to test my memory or highlight potential problems. She would ask me to repeat information I had given her the day before, then express concern when I couldn't remember the exact conversation. She would bring up appointments or events that I had supposedly mentioned, then worry aloud when I couldn't recall discussing them. She also began introducing new elements of confusion into our interactions. She would call to confirm plans we had never made, then act concerned when I had no memory of making them. She would reference conversations with other family members about my health, conversations that may or may not have actually occurred. Most manipulatively, she began questioning my version of events from our shared experiences. She would remember things differently than I did, always in ways that made me seem more confused or forgetful than I actually was. When I protested that my memory of events was different, she would suggest gently that this was exactly the kind of confusion she was worried about. The gaslighting was subtle but persistent. Jennifer was systematically undermining my confidence in my own perceptions and memories, making me question whether I could trust my own mind. It was psychological warfare disguised as filial concern. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came when I overheard a phone conversation between Jennifer and someone I couldn't identify. I had answered my home phone at the same time she was using her cell phone, and through some technical glitch I could hear both sides of her conversation before she realized I was on the line. "The documentation is going well," Jennifer was saying. "I have recordings of several conversations where she seems confused, and I've been keeping notes on all the incidents. The family is already concerned after Thanksgiving, so I think we're building a strong case." A strong case. The words confirmed my worst fears. Jennifer wasn't just worried about my health, she was actively building a legal case for my incompetence. "How long do you think it will take?" the other voice asked. "A few more months, maybe. I want to make sure we have enough evidence before we move forward. The last thing we want is for her to fight it successfully." Fight it. Fight what? AI? Competency hearing. A guardianship petition? The implications were terrifying. I hung up the phone as quietly as possible, my hands shaking with a combination of anger and fear. My own daughter was plotting against me, planning to have me declared legally incompetent so she could take control of my life and my assets. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I could barely process it. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to come to terms with what I had learned. The daughter I had raised, the child I had sacrificed, for the woman I had loved unconditionally was actively working to destroy my independence and dignity. But somewhere in the darkness, anger began to replace hurt. Jennifer might think she was dealing with a confused old woman who would submit quietly to her manipulation, but she was wrong. I was still Kathleen Reed, the woman who had raised 3 children alone, who had built a successful life from nothing, who had survived every challenge life had thrown at her. If Jennifer wanted a fight, she would get one, but it wouldn't be the fight she was expecting. The next morning, I began my own documentation process. If Jennifer was building a case against me, I would build a case for myself. I started keeping detailed records of our conversations, noting the manipulative questions and inconsistencies in her stories. I began saving the voice messages she left, preserving evidence of her increasingly controlling behavior. I also made an appointment with Dr. Morrison for a complete physical and cognitive evaluation. If Jennifer was going to question my mental competence, I wanted medical evidence of my capabilities. I wasn't going to let her narrative go unchallenged. But most importantly, I started reaching out to people outside Jennifer's influence. I called my friend Dorothy and asked if she had noticed any changes in my behavior or cognitive function. I spoke with my volunteer coordinator at the Literacy Center, asking for an honest assessment of my performance. I even contacted my financial advisor to review my investment decisions and confirm that I had been making sound choices. The feedback was universally positive. Everyone I spoke with saw me as sharp, capable, and fully competent. The confused, declining woman Jennifer was describing to the family simply didn't exist outside of her imagination. Armed with this knowledge, I began to understand the full scope of what was happening. Jennifer wasn't just concerned about my well-being, she was actively gaslighting me, manipulating my family's perceptions, and building a legal case to strip me of my autonomy. It was elder abuse in its most sophisticated form, dressed up as filial love and concern. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. She saw an elderly woman who would be easily manipulated and controlled, but she had forgotten who had raised her. She had forgotten the strength and determination that had carried me through decades of challenges. I was no longer the victim of Jennifer's scheme. I was an opponent, and I was preparing to fight back. But I also knew that the battle ahead would require more than just anger and determination. It would require strategy, patience, and a willingness to make choices that would change my family forever. The woman who had humiliated me at Thanksgiving, who had spent weeks undermining my confidence and planning my downfall, was about to discover that Kathleen Reed was far from finished. The real fight was just beginning, and this time I would be ready for her. My hands trembled as I pulled the manila envelope from beneath a stack of old photo albums in my bedroom closet. Inside were documents I had never expected to need, papers that would change everything I thought I knew about my daughter's motivations. The discovery had been accidental, stumbled upon during what should have been a routine afternoon of organizing old family memorabilia. I had been looking for my mother's jewelry box, wanting to wear her pearl earrings to my friend Eleanor's funeral service. Eleanor had always admired those pearls, and wearing them felt like bringing a piece of my mother's elegance to honor another remarkable woman. But as I shifted boxes and moved aside forgotten Christmas decorations, my fingers brushed against an envelope that had been wedged behind the jewelry box. The envelope was addressed to me, but I had no memory of placing it there. My name was written in Jennifer's distinctive handwriting, along with a date from 3 months ago. Inside, I found photocopies of documents that made my blood run cold. There were copies of my bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance, policies, and even my will. Every financial document I owned had been reproduced and studied. But these weren't the copies Jennifer had taken during our Saturday afternoon of organizing my papers. These were different documents, ones she had clearly accessed without my knowledge or permission. Attached to the financial records was a handwritten note in Jennifer's script, apparently meant for someone else. The words burned themselves into my memory as I read them. Mother's total assets approximately 2 million. Monthly income from investments and Social Security around $4,800. No major health expenses yet. She's been talking about increasing her charitable donations, which we need to prevent before it's too late. Before it's too late. The phrase echoed in my mind as I continued reading. There were notes about my daily routines, my friendships, my volunteer activities. Jennifer had been observing and recording details about my life with the thoroughness of a private investigator. But the most devastating discovery was a draft letter addressed to Dr. Morrison. In it, Jennifer described a litany of concerning behaviors she claimed to have witnessed. According to this letter, I had become increasingly forgetful, confused about dates and times, unable to manage complex tasks, and occasionally hostile when confronted about my limitations. She requested that Dr. Morrison evaluate me for cognitive decline and provide documentation that could be used to establish guardianship if necessary. The letter was dated for next week. Jennifer was planning to submit this fabricated account of my mental state to my own doctor, creating an official medical record of incompetence that existed only in her imagination. I sank onto my bed, clutching the papers and trying to process the magnitude of my daughter's betrayal. This wasn't just concern for my welfare or even simple greed. This was a calculated campaign to strip me of my legal rights and take control of my assets. Jennifer had been planning this for months, gathering information, building false narratives, and preparing to have me declared legally incompetent. The cruelest part was how she had used my own love against me. Every time I had welcomed her into my home, every document I had shown her in the spirit of family transparency, Every moment of vulnerability I had shared, she had weaponized against me. She had taken my trust and turned it into evidence for my own destruction. But among the devastating revelations, I found something that gave me hope. There was a business card clipped to one of the financial statements. Gerald Hoffman, attorney, at law, specializing in elder law and estate planning. Someone Jennifer had clearly consulted about the legal process of establishing guardianship. If Jennifer had been researching the legal requirements for taking control of my life, then I could research how to protect myself. I wasn't powerless in this situation, despite her efforts to make me feel that way. That evening, I called Mr. Hoffman's office and scheduled a consultation for the following week. When his secretary asked about the nature of my legal needs, I simply said I wanted to discuss protecting my assets and ensuring my autonomy as I aged. It wasn't entirely a lie, though I didn't mention that the threat I was protecting against was my own daughter. In the days leading up to my appointment, I gathered my own evidence. I retrieved all the recordings Jennifer had made of our conversations. The ones she claimed were just voice memos for herself. Listening to them with new understanding, I could hear the leading questions, the attempts to confuse me, the way she guided conversations toward topics that would make me seem disoriented. I also began reaching out to professionals in my life who could attest to my competence. My financial advisor, Margaret Chen, agreed to provide a written statement confirming that all my investment decisions had been sound and that I had never shown any signs of confusion during our meetings. Dr. Morrison's nurse, Linda, mentioned that my recent physical had shown excellent cognitive function and that I had been managing my medications and healthcare independently without any issues. The librarian at the literacy center where I volunteered, Susan Rodriguez, offered to write a letter describing my work with adult students learning to read. She noted that I had been successfully managing complex lesson plans, tracking student progress, and handling administrative duties that required attention to detail and excellent organizational skills. Each of these testimonials felt like armor against Jennifer's accusations. I was building my own case, documenting my competence with the same thoroughness she had used to document my supposed decline. But the emotional toll of this discovery was crushing. I found myself grieving not just for the daughter I thought I knew, but for the relationship we had shared that I now realized had been built on falsehoods. How long had Jennifer seen me as an obstacle to her financial security rather than as her mother? How many of our recent interactions had been motivated by manipulation rather than love? I thought about all the times she had expressed concern for my well-being, all the suggestions about my safety and security that I had interpreted as caring. Now I understood that every expression of worry had been a step in her plan to establish my incompetence. She hadn't been protecting me from harm. She had been creating a narrative that would justify taking control of my life. The worst part was wondering if Michael and David were involved in Jennifer's scheme. Had she shared her concerns about my mental state with them? Were they also documenting my supposed decline? Or were they simply innocent bystanders being manipulated by their sister's false narrative? I decided to test this by calling Michael and having a normal conversation about family matters. During our talk, I listened carefully for any signs that he was probing my mental state or documenting our interaction. To my relief, Michael seemed genuinely pleased to hear from me and chatted easily about his work, his daughter Emma's upcoming school play, and his plans for the holidays. When I mentioned that Jennifer had been visiting more frequently, Michael's response was telling. She said she's been worried about you since Thanksgiving. Something about you seeming confused or forgetful. But honestly, Mom, you sound fine to me. Maybe she's just being overprotective. Overprotective. If only Michael knew how calculated his sister's protection really was. I also reached out to David, using the excuse of asking about his girlfriend Lisa and their relationship. Again, I found no evidence that he was participating in any campaign against my competence. David was warm and chatty, sharing details about his job and asking about my holiday plans. When I mentioned Jennifer's increased attention, he echoed Michael's assessment. "Jen's always been a worrier," he said. "Remember how she used to freak out when we were kids if one of us was 5 minutes late coming home? She probably just wants to make sure you're okay living alone." Neither of my sons seemed aware of the scope of Jennifer's investigation into my life. They had accepted her narrative about concern for my well-being, without realizing they were being manipulated just as much as I was. Jennifer had positioned herself as the responsible daughter looking out for an aging mother, while using their trust to build credibility for her false claims. This realization brought both relief and additional anger. Relief that I wasn't facing betrayal from all my children, but anger that Jennifer was manipulating her brother's love for me to support her scheme. She was using the entire family as unwitting accomplices in her plan to destroy my independence. My appointment with Gerald Hoffman provided both sobering information and practical hope. His office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass, and steel that spoke of serious legal work. Mr. Hoffman himself was a distinguished man in his 60s, with graying hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen many family disputes over the years. When I explained my situation, leaving out the identity of the person threatening my autonomy and referring only to a family member who seemed to be building a case for my incompetence, Mr. Hoffman nodded knowingly. "Unfortunately, Mrs. Reed, what you're describing is more common than most people realize. Elder abuse often comes from within the family, and it's frequently motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern for welfare." He explained, "The legal process that would be required for someone to gain guardianship over me. They would need to file a petition with the court, providing evidence that you're unable to manage your own affairs. This typically requires medical testimony about cognitive decline, documentation of poor decision-making, and evidence that you pose a danger to yourself or others through your incompetence." "What constitutes evidence of poor decision-making?" I asked, thinking about Jennifer's careful documentation of my minor mistakes and momentary confusions. "The standards can be subjective," Mr. Hoffman admitted. "Forgetting appointments, making unusual purchases, giving away large sums of money, difficulty managing medications or household tasks. The problem is that many of these behaviors can have innocent explanations, but when presented in aggregate, they can paint a picture of someone who needs supervision." This was exactly what Jennifer was doing. She was collecting normal human mistakes and minor oversights, then presenting them as evidence of cognitive decline. A missed appointment became evidence of confusion. A momentary lapse in memory became proof of decline. Thoughtful, charitable giving became dangerous financial mismanagement. "How can I protect myself?" I asked. Mr. Hoffman outlined several strategies. First, get a comprehensive cognitive evaluation from a neurologist or geriatrician, not just your regular physician. This will provide medical evidence of your competence. Second, document your ability to manage complex tasks independently. Keep records of your financial management, your daily activities, your social engagements. Third, consider creating what we call a designation of standby guardian, essentially naming someone you trust to act as guardian if you ever do need one, which prevents a court from appointing someone you don't want. He also suggested that I might want to consider modifying my estate planning. If someone is challenging your competence with the goal of controlling your assets, you might want to make it clear that such behavior will have consequences for their inheritance. As I left Mr. Hoffman's office, I felt both empowered and heartbroken. I now had the legal knowledge to protect myself from Jennifer's scheme, but using that knowledge would mean acknowledging that my daughter was truly my enemy. It would mean accepting that the relationship I had treasured was based on deception and greed. That evening, I called Dr. Morrison's office and scheduled a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. I explained to his nurse that I wanted thorough testing to establish a baseline for my mental function as I aged. I didn't mention Jennifer's plans to submit her fabricated letter of concern, but I wanted to be proactive about getting medical documentation of my competence. I also began creating what Mr. Hoffman had called a competence portfolio. I started keeping detailed records of my daily activities, my financial decisions, my social interactions. I documented every task I completed successfully, every complex problem I solved, every demonstration of my continued capability. When Jennifer called that week to check on me, I listened to her questions with new ears. She asked if I had remembered to pay my electric bill, whether I had gotten confused driving to the grocery store, if I had taken my vitamins consistently. Each question was designed to elicit admissions of difficulty or confusion. "I'm managing." "Everything just fine, Jennifer," I told her. "In fact, I've been quite busy lately. I'm reorganizing my financial records, meeting with my attorney about updating my will, and considering some changes to my charitable giving." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Changes to your charitable giving? Mom, you should be careful about making major financial decisions without discussing them with family first." There it was, the real concern underlying all her supposed worry about my health. Jennifer wasn't afraid I was becoming incompetent. She was afraid I might give away money she considered hers. "My charitable giving is my decision to make," I said firmly. "Just as my financial planning is my responsibility. I've been managing money successfully for decades, and I don't intend to stop now." "But Mom, at your age, it's important to have someone help you make sure you're not being taken advantage of." "The only person trying to take advantage of me," I interrupted, "is someone who thinks they know better than I do about my own capabilities and choices." Another pause. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was cooler. "I'm just trying to look out for your best interests." "No, Jennifer, you're trying to look out for your own interests, but I'm still perfectly capable of looking out for myself." After I hung up, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I had drawn a line in the sand, making it clear that I wouldn't be manipulated or controlled. But I had also likely escalated the conflict, pushing Jennifer to move faster with her plans to have me declared incompetent. Sure enough, within 2 days, I received a call from Dr. Morrison's office. Jennifer had submitted her letter of concern and requested that I be evaluated for cognitive decline. The nurse explained that while they took all family concerns seriously, they would need my consent for any extensive evaluation. "Actually," I said, "I've already scheduled a comprehensive cognitive assessment for next week. I'm being proactive about monitoring my mental health as I age." I could hear the surprise in the nurse's voice. "Oh, that's wonderful, Mrs. Reed. Most patients aren't that forward-thinking about cognitive health." When I mentioned that my daughter had submitted a letter of concern, the nurse was tactful but informative. "We do occasionally receive communications from family members who are worried about their loved ones. Sometimes these concerns are well-founded, but often they reflect the family member's anxiety more than any actual decline in the patient." The cognitive evaluation was thorough and, frankly, enjoyable. Dr. Patricia Walsh, the geriatrician who conducted the assessment, put me through a series of tests that challenged my memory, reasoning, problem-solving abilities, and attention span. I found myself engaged and even competitive, wanting to perform well not just for my own peace of mind, but to create undeniable evidence of my mental acuity. The results were unequivocal. Dr. Walsh's report stated that I showed no signs of cognitive decline and that my mental function was well within normal ranges for someone my age. In fact, she noted that my performance on several tests exceeded average expectations and demonstrated exceptional cognitive reserve and adaptive thinking skills. When I asked Dr. Walsh about the letter of concern Jennifer had submitted, she was professional but clear. Family members sometimes interpret normal age-related changes as signs of decline. Occasionally forgetting where you put your keys or needing a moment to recall someone's name doesn't indicate cognitive impairment. These are normal experiences for people of all ages, but families can become hypervigilant when someone reaches their 70s. She also made a point that resonated with me deeply. Sometimes family members project their own anxieties about aging onto their loved ones. They may unconsciously catastrophize minor incidents because they're afraid of what they represent. But I knew Jennifer's behavior wasn't unconscious catastrophizing. It was deliberate manipulation designed to create a false narrative of my decline. She wasn't afraid of my aging. She was using the fear of aging as a weapon against my autonomy. Armed with Dr. Walsh's report and the other documentation I had gathered, I felt ready to confront Jennifer directly. But first, I wanted to understand the full scope of her plan. I needed to know who else she had involved, what timeline she was working with, and exactly what legal steps she intended to take. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Jennifer called to suggest we have lunch together. Just the two of us, to talk about some important family matters. Her tone was serious, almost formal, and I suspected this would be when she revealed her plans to take control of my life. I agreed to meet her at a quiet restaurant downtown, choosing a location where we could speak privately, but where our conversation would take place in a public setting. I had learned enough about Jennifer's manipulative tactics to want witnesses nearby, even if they couldn't hear our specific words. As I prepared for this confrontation, I felt a strange mixture of grief and determination. I was about to face the daughter I had raised with unconditional love, the child I had sacrificed everything to protect and nurture. But I was no longer facing her as a confused, vulnerable mother susceptible to manipulation. I was facing her as Kathleen Reed, a woman who had survived every challenge life had thrown at her, who had built strength from adversity, and who refused to surrender her dignity without a fight. Jennifer was about to discover that the mother she thought she could manipulate and control was far more formidable than she had imagined. The battle for my independence was about to begin in earnest, and I was finally ready to stop playing defense and start fighting back. The restaurant Jennifer had chosen was deliberately intimate, with small tables tucked into cozy corners that would make our conversation feel private and contained. She arrived 15 minutes early and had already secured a corner booth when I walked in, positioning herself with her back to the wall so she could observe the entire dining room. It was a strategic choice that reminded me of how calculated every aspect of her behavior had become. I watched her face as I approached the table, noting the slight tension around her eyes and the way her fingers drummed nervously against her water glass. She was preparing for something significant, and her anxiety was palpable despite her attempts to appear casual and concerned. "Mom, you look wonderful," she said as I sat down, her voice carrying that overly bright tone I had come to recognize as performative. "How have you been feeling? Any more of those little episodes we talked about?" Little episodes. She was already framing our conversation with the language of decline and confusion, setting the stage for whatever proposal she was planning to make. I smiled pleasantly and ordered my usual chicken salad, determined not to let her control the narrative from the very beginning. "I've been feeling excellent, actually. I had a complete physical last week with some additional cognitive testing, and Dr. Walsh said my mental function is exceptional for someone my age. In fact, she seemed quite impressed with my test results." I watched Jennifer's face carefully as I delivered this information, noting the brief flash of surprise followed by something that looked almost like disappointment. She had clearly not expected me to be proactive about medical evaluation, and my excellent results were obviously not what she had hoped to hear. "Dr. Walsh? I thought Dr. Morrison was handling your medical care." Dr. Morrison referred me to Dr. Walsh for specialized geriatric assessment. It's called being proactive about my health rather than waiting for problems to develop. Jennifer recovered quickly, switching tactics with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to corporate negotiations. "That's wonderful, Mom. I'm so glad you're taking your health seriously. But cognitive testing can miss early signs of decline. Sometimes family members notice changes before doctors do." There it was, the subtle undermining of medical authority that would allow her to position her own observations as more reliable than professional assessment. She was preparing to present herself as the expert on my mental state, despite having no medical training or objective measurement tools. "Speaking of family observations," I said carefully, "I've been noticing some concerning patterns in our recent interactions. Would you like to discuss those?" The question caught her off guard, and for a moment, her composed facade slipped. She looked genuinely puzzled, as if the idea that I might be evaluating her behavior had never occurred to her. In her mind, she was the observer, and I was the subject, not the other way around. "What kind of patterns?" she asked, her voice slightly sharper now. The constant questioning about my memory and daily activities. The repeated suggestions that I might be becoming confused or incompetent. The way you've been documenting our conversations and taking pictures of my personal documents. It feels less like daughterly concern and more like surveillance. Jennifer's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Mom, I'm worried about you. That's what caring children do when they see their parents struggling. I'm not surveilling you. I'm trying to help you." "Help me with what exactly?" "I'm managing my household successfully, handling my finances competently, maintaining my health independently, and engaging in meaningful social activities." "What aspect of my life requires your help?" She leaned forward then, her voice taking on the patient, condescending tone that adults use with children. "Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're becoming defensive and hostile when people express legitimate concerns about your well-being. That kind of reaction can be a sign of cognitive changes." The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. By responding to her accusations, I was proving her point about my defensiveness. By defending my competence, I was demonstrating the very hostility she claimed was evidence of decline. She had created a logical trap where any resistance to her narrative became proof of the narrative itself. But I had spent weeks preparing for this conversation, and I refused to let her psychological games destabilize me. "Jennifer, what specific incidents are you interpreting as signs of cognitive decline? Can you give me concrete examples of these struggles you think you're observing?" She was ready with a list, clearly rehearsed and carefully curated. The wine incident at Thanksgiving. The repeated question about Emma's dance recital. The car keys in the refrigerator. The supposedly multiple phone calls about Sunday dinner plans. Each incident was presented with additional details that made my behavior sound more concerning than it had actually been. "And just last week," she continued, "you told me you were reorganizing your financial records, but when I asked you about it yesterday, you seemed confused about what you had meant." This was a complete fabrication. I had never seemed confused about my financial organization, and I had never spoken to her about it beyond mentioning that I was updating my records. But Jennifer was now creating fictional conversations and false memories, building a case that existed only in her imagination. "Jennifer," I said quietly, "I have never been confused about my financial records. In fact, I've been working with my attorney and financial advisor to ensure that all my affairs are properly organized and protected." Protected from what? The question came out sharper than she had intended, revealing the real fear underlying her concerns about my financial management. Protected from anyone who might try to take advantage of me or make decisions about my assets without my consent. We stared at each other across the small table, and I could see the moment when Jennifer realized that I understood exactly what she was doing. The pretense of concern, the careful documentation, the systematic undermining of my confidence. I saw through all of it. "Mom," she said, her voice now carrying a note of desperation, "I think you're misunderstanding my intentions. Everything I've been doing comes from a place of love. I'm scared that you're going to hurt yourself or make decisions that you'll regret later." "What decisions are you afraid I'll make?" "Well, you mentioned increasing your charitable donations. At your age, with your fixed income, that might not be wise. And you're talking about updating your will without discussing it with family first." These kinds of major financial decisions should involve people who care about you. There was the truth, finally laid bare. Jennifer wasn't concerned about my safety or my cognitive function. She was concerned about my financial decisions and their impact on her expected inheritance. She wanted control over my assets, disguised as protection of my well-being. My charitable giving and estate planning are my decisions to make, I said firmly. They always have been, and they always will be, as long as I'm competent to make them. And according to Dr. Walsh's recent evaluation, I'm exceptionally competent. Jennifer's composure finally cracked completely. But what if you're not thinking clearly? What if someone is influencing you to make poor choices? What if you give away everything and then need expensive care later? What if you're the one who's not thinking clearly, Jennifer? What if your concern about my decisions is really concern about how those decisions might affect you? The accusation hung between us like a physical presence. Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hurt, anger, and, finally, a cold calculation that I had never seen before. This was a side of my daughter that I didn't recognize, someone capable of strategic manipulation and ruthless pursuit of her own interests. I can see that you're not ready to have this conversation rationally, she said, her voice now completely clinical. When you're ready to discuss your future responsibly, I'll be here to help. But Mom, these decisions affect the whole family, not just you. No, Jennifer, these decisions affect me. My money, my property, my medical care, my daily life, these are mine to control. The family's role is to love and support me, not to manage me. She gathered her purse and stood up, leaving money on the table for her untouched meal. I hope you'll reconsider your attitude before it's too late. I really hope that. The threat was clear, though carefully veiled. Jennifer was moving forward with her plans regardless of my resistance. She would continue building her case for my incompetence, and my refusal to cooperate would become evidence of my deteriorating judgment. After she left, I sat in the restaurant for another hour, processing what had just occurred. My daughter had essentially declared war on my independence, and she was prepared to use every weapon at her disposal to win. She would manipulate my other children, create false medical narratives, and present fabricated evidence to support her case. But she had also revealed her vulnerabilities. Her desperation about my financial decisions showed that her timeline was urgent. She needed to establish control before I could make changes to my estate planning that would protect my assets from her manipulation. She was operating under time pressure, which meant she would likely make mistakes. More importantly, she had underestimated my resilience and my intelligence. She saw an elderly woman who could be confused and controlled, but she had forgotten that this elderly woman had survived decades of challenges through strength, determination, and strategic thinking. That evening, I called my friend Ruth Palmer, a retired family court judge who had dealt with countless guardianship cases during her career. Ruth was one of the sharpest people I knew, someone whose judgment I trusted completely and whose legal expertise could help me understand exactly what I was facing. Kathy, Ruth said after I had explained the situation, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of attempted financial abuse. The systematic documentation, the false medical narratives, the isolation from supportive relationships, these are classic tactics used by adult children to gain control over aging parents' assets. What are my options for protecting myself? Ruth's advice was comprehensive and sobering. First, document everything. Every interaction with Jennifer, every false claim she makes, every attempt to manipulate your other children or your medical providers. Keep detailed records with dates and specifics. She also suggested that I consider obtaining a restraining order if Jennifer's behavior escalated to harassment, and recommended that I immediately update my estate planning to include specific language about the consequences of challenging my competence. Most importantly, Ruth said, you need to build a support network of people who can testify to your competence and independence. professionals who work with you, friends who interact with you regularly, service providers who can attest to your cognitive function. I had already begun this process, but Ruth's advice helped me understand how to make it more systematic and legally protective. I needed witnesses to my competence who couldn't be dismissed as biased family members or friends. Over the following days, I reached out to various professionals in my life. My banker, Robert Chen, provided a letter confirming that I had been managing complex financial transactions independently and had never shown any signs of confusion or poor judgment. My insurance agent wrote a detailed statement about my ability to understand and evaluate policy options during our recent coverage review. The director of the literacy center where I volunteered offered to provide testimony about my work with adult learners, noting that I had successfully adapted my teaching methods to accommodate different learning styles and had demonstrated excellent organizational and interpersonal skills. Even my hairstylist, Maria Santos, agreed to write a statement about our regular conversations, confirming that I was always alert, engaged, and current on family and community events during my weekly appointments. Each of these testimonials felt like armor against Jennifer's accusations. I was building an evidence base that would be difficult to dismiss or discredit, documentation from neutral third parties who had no financial stake in my competence. But I also knew that Jennifer wouldn't give up easily. She had invested, too, much time and effort in her campaign to simply accept defeat. If anything, my resistance would likely escalate her tactics and push her to more aggressive measures. Sure enough, within a week of our restaurant confrontation, I began receiving calls from Michael and David. Both conversations followed similar patterns, with my sons expressing concern about my defensive attitude and my unwillingness to accept help from family. "Jennifer's really worried about you, Mom," Michael said during our call. "She said you got angry when she tried to discuss your financial planning and that you're making some concerning decisions without family input." The way Jennifer had framed our conversation was masterful. She had transformed my reasonable defense of my autonomy into evidence of hostility and poor judgment. She was positioning herself as the concerned daughter trying to help an increasingly difficult mother. "Michael," I said carefully, "what specific decisions am I making that concern Jennifer?" "Well, she mentioned that you're thinking about giving away large amounts of money to charity and that you're being secretive about your estate planning. She's worried that someone might be taking advantage of you." Jennifer had twisted my mention of charitable giving into reckless financial behavior and transformed my privacy about personal legal matters into suspicious secrecy. She was using my son's love for me to manipulate their perceptions, making them unwitting allies in her campaign. "Have you noticed any changes in my behavior or thinking that concern you?" I asked. Michael was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, Mom, no, you seem fine to me. But Jennifer's always been more observant about these things, and if she's worried, maybe we should pay attention." There it was. Jennifer had positioned herself as the family expert on my mental state, the one whose observations should be trusted over everyone else's direct experience. She was using her reputation as the responsible, organized daughter to give credibility to her false narrative. My conversation with David followed a similar pattern, though he seemed less convinced by Jennifer's concerns. "She wants us all to sit down together and talk about your future," he told me. "Some kind of family meeting to discuss how we can best support you as you get older." A family meeting. Jennifer was planning to formalize her campaign, bringing Michael and David together to present her case against my competence in a setting where I would be outnumbered and surrounded by people she had already begun to influence. "What did you tell her about this meeting?" "I said I'd think about it, but Mom, honestly, I don't understand what there is to discuss. You seem fine to me, you're managing your life well, and you've never asked for help with anything." Jennifer keeps talking about these concerning incidents, but I haven't seen any of them myself. David's skepticism gave me hope. Not all of my children had been completely swayed by Jennifer's manipulation, but I also knew that Jennifer would be working hard to change his mind before any family meeting took place. That night, I made a decision that felt both empowering and heartbreaking. I called Gerald Hoffman and scheduled an appointment to discuss more aggressive legal protections. If Jennifer was escalating her campaign, I needed to be prepared with legal weapons of my own. But I also made another decision, one that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. I decided to stop trying to preserve my relationship with Jennifer. She had chosen to see me as an opponent rather than her mother, and I would respond accordingly. The woman who had spent Thanksgiving systematically undermining my confidence in front of my entire family was not the daughter I had raised. She was someone willing to destroy my dignity and independence for financial gain, someone capable of sustained psychological manipulation and strategic cruelty. I couldn't save that relationship, but I could save myself, and I was finally ready to do whatever that required, even if it meant losing a daughter in order to remain myself. The next phase of this battle would be fought on legal and medical grounds, with documentation and professional testimony rather than family loyalty and emotional appeals. Jennifer had chosen those weapons, and I would use them better than she ever imagined possible. She was about to discover that Kathleen Reed had not survived 73 years by being weak or easily defeated. She was about to learn what happened when you underestimated someone who had nothing left to lose except her dignity and everything to fight for. The family meeting Jennifer had orchestrated was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon in mid-January, nearly 2 months after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. She had chosen my own living room as the venue, claiming it would be more comfortable for me than meeting somewhere else. But I understood the real reason for the location choice. She wanted me on my own territory when she delivered what she clearly expected to be the final blow to my independence. Michael and David arrived together, both looking uncomfortable and uncertain about what they were about to participate in. I could see the confusion in their faces as they took in the formal way Jennifer had arranged the furniture, with chairs positioned in a semicircle facing the sofa where she had directed me to sit. It looked more like an intervention than a family discussion. Jennifer came prepared with a leather portfolio filled with documents, her phone ready to record, and the confident demeanor of someone who believed she held all the winning cards. She had spent weeks setting the stage for this moment, building her case piece by piece, and she clearly expected today to be her victory. I had prepared differently. Hidden in my bedroom were my own documents, Dr. Walsh's cognitive evaluation, letters from various professionals attesting to my competence, financial records demonstrating my sound decision-making, and legal paperwork that would protect my assets and autonomy. But my most important preparation had been psychological. I had spent weeks accepting the reality of who Jennifer had become and steeling myself for what I would need to do. "Thank you all for coming," Jennifer began, her voice taking on the formal tone she used for business presentations. "I know this is difficult, but we need to have an honest conversation about Mom's situation and her future care needs." Future care needs. She was already assuming the conclusion, treating my need for supervision as established fact rather than the topic. Under discussion. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want to make something clear. I'm 73 years old, not 93. I'm in excellent health, both physically and mentally. I live independently, manage my own affairs successfully, and maintain an active social and volunteer life. I'm curious to know exactly what situation you think we need to discuss?" Jennifer consulted her notes, clearly prepared for this resistance. "Mom, we're here because we love you, and we're concerned about changes we've observed in your cognitive function and decision-making capabilities. I've been documenting incidents over the past several months that suggest you may be experiencing early-stage dementia or other age-related cognitive decline." She opened her portfolio and began reading from what appeared to be a comprehensive list. The wine incident at Thanksgiving, the The repeated question about Emma's dance recital, the car keys in the refrigerator, multiple phone calls about the same plans, confusion about financial discussions, defensive reactions to offers of help. But as she continued reading, I noticed something interesting. The incidents she was describing were increasingly elaborate and detailed, with elements I didn't recognize from my own memory of events. She wasn't just documenting my supposed mistakes anymore. She was embellishing them, adding details that made them sound more serious and concerning. According to Jennifer's account, I had been confused about what day it was during multiple conversations. I had allegedly asked the same questions repeatedly during single phone calls. I had supposedly become lost driving to familiar destinations and had difficulty remembering recent conversations. None of these elaborate incidents had actually occurred, but Jennifer was presenting them with such confidence and detail that even I began to question my own memory for a moment. The gaslighting was masterful, designed to make me doubt my own perceptions while convincing my sons that my denials were evidence of the very confusion she was describing. "Jennifer," I said when she finished reading, "many of the incidents you've just described never happened. You're not documenting my cognitive decline. You're creating fictional evidence to support a false narrative." "Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Your inability to remember these incidents is precisely the problem we're addressing." It was a perfect trap. By denying her false claims, I was proving her point about my memory problems. By insisting that my version of events was accurate, I was demonstrating the defensiveness she claimed was evidence of cognitive decline. But I had learned not to argue with Jennifer's fabrications directly. Instead, I turned to my sons. "Michael, David, have either of you witnessed any of these concerning incidents Jennifer is describing?" Michael looked uncomfortable. "I haven't seen anything myself, Mom, but Jennifer spends more time with you than we do. She's in a better position to notice changes." "David?" My youngest son was clearly struggling with the situation. "I've talked to you dozens of times over the past few months, Mom, and you've always seemed completely normal to me. I haven't seen any confusion or memory problems." Jennifer was ready for this. "That's because Mom puts on a performance when she talks to you. She saves her best behavior for occasional phone calls and short visits. It's when she's tired or stressed or dealing with complex tasks that the problems become apparent." She was positioning my competent interactions with Michael and David as evidence of my deception rather than my capability. According to her logic, my ability to function normally was proof that I was hiding my dysfunction, not evidence that no dysfunction existed. "Jennifer," I said, "I think it's time we discuss the real reason for this meeting. This isn't about my cognitive function or my care needs. This is about your financial situation and your desire to gain control over my assets." The room went dead silent. Michael and David looked shocked, clearly having never considered that Jennifer's motives might be anything other than pure concern for my welfare. Jennifer's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. "Mom, that's a very hurtful accusation. Everything I'm doing is motivated by love and concern for your well-being." "Is it? Then why have you been researching guardianship law with Gerald Hoffman? Why have you been photographing my financial documents without my permission? Why have you been asking detailed questions about my investment portfolio and insurance policies?" Now it was Jennifer's turn to look trapped. She clearly hadn't expected me to know about her consultations with the attorney or her covert examination of my financial records. "I wanted to understand your situation so I could help protect you," she said, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments earlier. "Protect me from what? From making my own decisions about my own money?" Michael found his voice then. "What's this about researching guardianship law? Jennifer, what exactly are you planning?" Jennifer had lost control of the narrative, and I could see her scrambling to regain it. "I've been looking into all the options for supporting Mom as she ages. Guardianship is just one possibility, and only if her condition deteriorates to The point where she can't make safe decisions for herself. But she's not at that point, David said, his voice rising. Mom seems fine to me. More than fine, actually. That's because you don't see her every day. You don't see the small mistakes, the moments of confusion, the poor judgment about financial matters. I stood up then, walking to my desk and retrieving the envelope I had prepared for this moment. Since we're discussing my cognitive function and financial judgment, perhaps we should look at some objective evidence. I handed copies of Dr. Walsh's evaluation to each of my children. The report was comprehensive and unambiguous. My cognitive function was not only normal, but exceptional for someone my age. There was no evidence of dementia, mild cognitive impairment, or any other condition that would affect my ability to make independent decisions. Jennifer read the report with visible dismay, clearly having never expected me to seek professional evaluation on my own initiative. Mom, this is just one doctor's opinion. Cognitive decline can be subtle and intermittent. Just because you performed well on tests doesn't mean... It means, I interrupted, that a qualified geriatrician with decades of experience in assessing cognitive function has determined that I'm mentally competent. It means that your observations about my supposed decline are either mistaken or deliberately false. I handed out additional documents then, letters from my banker, my financial advisor, my insurance agent, and several other professionals who worked with me regularly. Each one attested to my competence, my sound judgment, and my ability to handle complex tasks independently. The weight of professional testimony was overwhelming. Jennifer's carefully constructed narrative of cognitive decline crumbled in the face of objective evidence from qualified experts who had no personal stake in the outcome. But I wasn't finished. I had one more revelation that would expose the true nature of Jennifer's campaign against me. There's something else you all need to know, I said, returning to my desk and retrieving another envelope. I found these documents hidden in my bedroom closet, apparently placed there by someone who had access to my home and my personal papers. I distributed copies of the documents Jennifer had hidden, my financial statements, insurance policies, and the draft letter to Dr. Morrison, describing fabricated symptoms of cognitive decline. I also included the handwritten notes about my assets and the business card for the elder law attorney. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael and David stared at the papers in horror, finally understanding the scope and calculation of Jennifer's deception. Jennifer, Michael said, his voice barely controlled, did you put these in Mom's closet? Did you write this letter describing symptoms that don't exist? Jennifer's composure finally cracked completely. You don't understand. Mom is making poor financial decisions. She's talking about giving away large amounts to charity, updating her will without family input. Someone needs to protect her assets before she makes irreversible mistakes. Protect? Her assets for whom? David demanded. For her or for us? It's the same thing. Family money should stay in the family. Mom doesn't understand the implications of what she's planning. There it was, finally spoken aloud. Jennifer didn't believe I had the right to make my own decisions about my own money. She saw my assets as family property that she was entitled to protect and ultimately inherit. But they're not family assets, I said quietly. They're my assets, earned through my work and my husband's work, grown through my careful management and investment decisions. I have the right to do whatever I choose with my own money. You're being selfish and short-sighted, Jennifer shot back, abandoning all pretense of concern for my well-being. You're jeopardizing your children's inheritance out of spite. Michael stood up abruptly. Jennifer, stop. Just stop. You've been lying to us, manipulating us, trying to convince us that Mom needed our help when the only thing she needed was protection from you. David was shaking his head in disbelief. I can't believe you've been planning this for months. All those conversations about Mom's health, all your concerns about her safety, it was all manipulation. But I had saved the most devastating revelation for last. I walked to my desk one final time and retrieved a legal document that I had been hoping I would never need to use. "Since we're discussing my estate planning and financial decisions," I said, "you should know that I met with my attorney last week to make some important changes to my will." I handed copies of the revised will to Michael and David, watching as they read through the new provisions. Jennifer lunged forward, trying to grab a copy, but I held it away from her. "The original will left my estate divided equally among my 3 children," I explained. "The new will reflects my understanding of who truly cares about my well-being versus who sees me as a source of financial security." Michael's inheritance remained substantial, including the family home and a significant portion of my investment portfolio. David received a generous bequest that would provide long-term financial security. Both bequests came with letters expressing my love and gratitude for their genuine concern and support. Jennifer's inheritance had been reduced to a single item, my mother's jewelry box, along with a letter explaining that love and respect cannot be inherited, only earned. The majority of my estate was now designated for charitable organizations that supported literacy education, elder care advocacy, and programs that protected vulnerable adults from financial abuse. "You can't do this," Jennifer said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're not thinking clearly. This proves exactly what I've been saying about your judgment." "On the contrary," I replied, "this demonstrates perfectly clear thinking. I'm leaving my money to people and organizations that value me for who I am, rather than what I can provide. I'm protecting my assets from someone who has proven willing to lie, manipulate, and psychologically abuse me in order to control them. I'll contest this will. I'll prove that you were mentally incompetent when you made these changes." "With what evidence?" "Dr. Walsh's evaluation confirms my competence. Multiple professionals have attested to my sound judgment. You have no credible evidence of cognitive decline, because no such decline exists." Jennifer turned to her brothers, clearly expecting them to support her challenge to the will. But Michael and David were looking at her with expressions of disgust and disappointment. "Don't look at us for help," Michael said. "You've forfeited any right to family support. What you've done to Mom is unforgivable." "She manipulated you," Jennifer said desperately. "She's turned you against me, can't you see that?" "No, Jennifer," David replied. "You manipulated us. You tried to convince us that our mother was losing her mind so you could steal her independence and her money. That's not family support. That's elder abuse." The final piece of my revelation involved the legal protections I had put in place to prevent any future attempts to challenge my competence or control my decisions. I had executed a comprehensive advance directive that named Michael as my healthcare proxy and David as my financial power of attorney, but only in the event of genuine incapacity confirmed by multiple medical professionals. I had also filed a restraining order against Jennifer, prohibiting her from accessing my medical records, contacting my doctors, or interfering with my financial affairs. Any attempt to initiate guardianship proceedings would be met with my own legal team and overwhelming evidence of my competence. "You're making a terrible mistake," Jennifer said as she gathered her papers and prepared to leave. "Someday you're going to need help, and you'll regret pushing away the one person who was trying to protect you." "I didn't push you away, Jennifer. You chose to see me as an obstacle to your financial security rather than as your mother. You chose manipulation over honesty, control over respect. These were your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." After Jennifer left, Michael and David stayed for another hour, both struggling to process what they had learned about their sister. They apologized repeatedly for not recognizing her manipulation earlier, for allowing themselves to be used as weapons against my independence. "I should have seen it," Michael said. "I should have questioned why Jennifer was the only one seeing these problems. She's very skilled at manipulation," I told him. "She used your love for me against both of us. But you did see through it eventually, and that's what matters." We talked about Jennifer's financial pressures, her marriage problems, and the desperation that might have driven her to such extreme measures. I found myself feeling sorry for the woman my daughter had become, even as I remained firm about the consequences of her actions. "Will you ever forgive her?" David asked. "I don't know," I admitted. What she did wasn't just about money. She tried to convince me that I was losing my mind. She attempted to destroy my confidence in my own perceptions and memories. That kind of psychological abuse leaves deep scars. As my sons prepared to leave, they both hugged me with an intensity that spoke to their relief and their renewed appreciation for my strength and resilience. "Mom," Michael said, "I'm proud of how you handled this. I'm proud that you fought back instead of letting her win." After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the documents that had protected my independence and dignity. The afternoon had been exhausting and heartbreaking, but it had also been liberating. I was no longer living under the shadow of Jennifer's surveillance and manipulation. I was free to make my own decisions without fear that they would be used as evidence against my competence. The cost had been enormous. I had lost a daughter, or perhaps more accurately, I had discovered that the daughter I thought I had never really existed. The Jennifer who was willing to psychologically abuse me for financial gain was not the child I had raised with love and sacrifice. But I had also discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned that I could face betrayal and manipulation without being destroyed by them. I had proven to myself and others that Kathleen Reed was still a force to be reckoned with. In the weeks that followed, my life returned to a rhythm of genuine peace and autonomy. I continued my volunteer work at the Literacy Center, maintained my friendships and social activities, and managed my household and finances with the same competence I had demonstrated for decades. Michael and David checked on me regularly, but their calls and visits felt different now. They came from love and genuine interest rather than surveillance and evaluation. They respected my independence while offering appropriate support, understanding the difference between caring for someone and controlling them. I never heard from Jennifer again. According to her brothers, she and Mark were seeing a marriage counselor and working through their financial problems with professional help rather than schemes to control other people's assets. I hoped that someday she would understand the magnitude of what she had tried to do and find a way to become the person I had tried to raise her to be. But I also knew that some breaches of trust are too fundamental to repair. A mother-daughter relationship based on love and respect had been replaced by a predator-prey dynamic that I could never accept again. Jennifer had chosen to see me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved, and that choice had consequences that would last the rest of our lives. The most important lesson I learned from this ordeal was that family relationships, like all relationships, must be based on mutual respect and genuine care. Blood ties alone are not enough to sustain connection when one person is willing to manipulate and harm the other for personal gain. I also learned that aging does not automatically mean becoming vulnerable or losing the right to autonomy. Society often treats elderly people as problems to be managed, rather than individuals with wisdom, experience, and continuing capacity for growth and contribution. But perhaps most importantly, I learned that strength isn't about never facing betrayal or hardship. Strength is about recognizing those challenges clearly, responding to them strategically, and refusing to let them diminish your sense of self-worth and dignity. As I sat in my garden on a warm spring evening 6 months later, tending to the roses that Robert had planted 40 years earlier, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of peace. The woman who had been humiliated at Thanksgiving dinner had discovered reserves of courage and determination that even she hadn't known existed. Jennifer had tried to steal my independence, my dignity, and my future. Instead, she had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that Kathleen Reed was strong enough to face any challenge and wise enough to protect what mattered most. The roses bloomed as beautifully as ever, tended by hands that had proven themselves capable of nurturing life and defending it against those who would destroy it for their own gain. And in their beauty, I found a reflection of my own resilience, my own capacity to flourish, despite attempts to diminish and control me. The battle for my dignity had been won, but the victory belonged not just to me. It belonged to every person who refuses to surrender their autonomy, to those who would exploit their vulnerability, every elder who insists on being treated with respect rather than condescension, and every family member who chooses love over control. 1 year later, I stand in my kitchen preparing another Thanksgiving dinner. But everything has changed. The house smells the same. Turkey roasting, sweet potatoes caramelizing, the familiar comfort of holiday spices filling every room. But the woman cooking this meal is fundamentally different from the one who stood in this same kitchen 12 months ago, unknowingly preparing for her own public humiliation. This year, only Michael, Sarah, and Emma will join me, along with David and Lisa, who recently became engaged. 5 people instead of 9, but the love filling this house feels more genuine than anything I experienced during those larger, more complicated gatherings of the past. Sometimes smaller circles hold deeper truths. The empty chairs at my table tell their own story. Jennifer's absence is not just physical but philosophical. She chose to see family as a business arrangement rather than a bond of love. Mark and the boys, Tyler and Brandon, became casualties of her choices, kept away by loyalty to a woman who had prioritized inheritance over integrity. I grieve not just for Jennifer, but for the grandchildren who lost their grandmother because their mother valued money more than relationships. Yet in this grief, I have found unexpected gifts. The crisis that nearly destroyed my independence ultimately strengthened it beyond anything I had previously known. The daughter who tried to convince me I was losing my mind inadvertently proved to me just how sharp, resilient, and capable I remain. Her manipulation became the catalyst for my own awakening to powers I had forgotten I possessed. Dr. Walsh continues to marvel at my cognitive assessments during our quarterly checkups. Not only do I show no signs of decline, but several of my scores have actually improved over the past year. She attributes this to what she calls cognitive resilience under stress, the way challenging circumstances can actually sharpen mental function rather than diminish it. Jennifer's attacks on my competence forced me to engage my mind more fully, to document and defend my capabilities in ways that ultimately enhanced them. My volunteer work at the Literacy Center has expanded significantly. I now coordinate the entire adult education program, managing schedules for 12 volunteer tutors and tracking progress for over 30 students. The organizational complexity would challenge someone half my age, yet I handle it with an ease that surprises even me. My students, many of whom are struggling with their own family challenges, often seek my advice about standing up for themselves in difficult relationships. They call me their warrior grandmother, a title that makes me smile every time I hear it. The financial independence I fought so hard to protect has become a source of empowerment rather than anxiety. Working with a new estate planning attorney, I have created a comprehensive plan that ensures my assets will support causes I care about while providing security for Michael and David. The charitable foundation I established focuses on 3 areas: literacy education, elder advocacy, and protection services for vulnerable adults facing financial abuse. Jennifer's attempt to steal my autonomy will ultimately help hundreds of other people maintain theirs. Michael has become my unofficial guardian of family memory, carefully preserving the photo albums and family documents that Jennifer once photographed, for her own purposes. He regularly brings Emma to visit, and we spend hours going through old pictures and telling stories about her grandfather Robert and the early days of our family. These conversations feel sacred, a way of passing down not just history, but values, the importance of integrity, the courage to stand up for yourself, the understanding that love is demonstrated through respect, not control. David's engagement to Lisa has brought new joy into my life. Lisa is a social worker who specializes in elder care, and she has helped me understand that what Jennifer did to me represents a broader pattern of abuse that affects thousands of families. Through Lisa's encouragement, I have begun speaking at community centers and senior organizations about recognizing and preventing elder financial abuse. My story, once a source of private shame, has become a tool for protecting others. These speaking engagements have connected me with other survivors of family manipulation, and we have formed an informal support network. There's Margaret, whose son tried to have her declared incompetent so he could sell her house. There's Robert, whose daughter systematically isolated him from friends while taking control of his bank accounts. There's Patricia, whose entire family conspired to move her into assisted living against her will so they could manage her investments. Our stories are different in detail, but identical in pattern. Adult children who see aging parents as problems to be solved rather than people to be respected. Families who confuse love with control and justify manipulation as protection. The gradual erosion of an elder's autonomy, disguised as care and concern, until suddenly they wake up to find their lives are no longer their own. But we are also stories of resistance and recovery. Each of us found ways to fight back, to reclaim our independence, to establish boundaries that protect our dignity. We represent proof that aging does not automatically mean becoming helpless, that wisdom and experience can be powerful weapons against those who would exploit vulnerability. The most profound change in my life has been the shift in how I understand family itself. For decades, I believed that family bonds were unconditional, that blood relationships carried obligations and loyalties that transcended individual behavior. Jennifer's betrayal shattered that illusion, but in its place, I have discovered a more honest understanding of what family really means. True family is created through consistent acts of love, respect, and mutual support. It can include people who share your DNA, but it can also include friends who prove their loyalty through decades of genuine care. It can include neighbors who check on you during illness, professionals who treat you with dignity and respect, and even strangers who become chosen family through shared values and experiences. My chosen family now includes Ruth, my friend and former judge, who helped me navigate the legal complexities of protecting myself. It includes Eleanor's daughter, Susan, who continues to invite me to holiday gatherings even though her mother has passed away. It includes Maria, my hairstylist, who has become a confidant and advisor. It includes the students at the Literacy Center, who see me as a mentor and inspiration. These relationships lack the biological connection I shared with Jennifer, but they offer something more valuable: unconditional positive regard based on who I am rather than what I can provide. They represent family as it should be: voluntary, bonds of affection and respect that enhance each person's life rather than constraining or exploiting it. The legal protections I put in place have remained untested, but provide enormous peace of mind. The restraining order against Jennifer has never been violated, suggesting that she understood the seriousness of the boundaries I established. The advance directives naming Michael and David as my healthcare and financial proxies ensure that if I ever do need assistance, it will come from people who have proven their trustworthiness. More importantly, the documentation I compiled of my competence has given me confidence in my own judgment that no one can shake. When I second-guess a decision or wonder if I'm showing signs of decline, I can review the professional assessments that confirm my continued capability. Jennifer's gaslighting lost its power the moment I obtained objective validation of my mental law acuity. The financial costs of protecting myself were significant: legal fees, multiple medical evaluations, document preparation, and ongoing professional consultations. But these expenses were investments in my autonomy, payments for the privilege of remaining the author of my own life story. Every dollar spent on lawyers and doctors was a dollar protecting my right to make my own choices about my money, my health, and my future. Some people have suggested that I was too harsh in essentially disinheriting Jennifer, that family forgiveness should transcend individual betrayals. But forgiveness and consequences are not mutually exclusive. I can forgive Jennifer for the pain she caused while still refusing to reward her betrayal with financial inheritance. Forgiveness is about my emotional healing. Inheritance is about my values and choices. The letter I included with Jennifer's jewelry box inheritance attempted to explain this distinction. I wrote that I forgave her for the hurt she had caused, but that I could not pretend her actions had never happened. I explained that love cannot be bought or sold, that respect cannot be inherited, and that family bonds must be based on genuine care rather than financial expectation. I also wrote that the door to relationship repair was not permanently closed, but that it would require acknowledgement of the harm she had caused and genuine changes in how she viewed me and our relationship. She would need to see me as her mother, rather than as a financial resource, to value my autonomy rather than seeking to control it, to demonstrate through actions that she understood the difference between love and manipulation. So far, that acknowledgement has not come. Jennifer and Mark have stabilized their financial situation through credit counseling and lifestyle changes, according to reports from Michael and David. But there has been no communication with me, no attempt to apologize or repair the damage she caused. Perhaps she is too ashamed of her actions, or perhaps she still believes she was justified in trying to control my life. Either way, I have made peace with her absence. The woman who raised 3 children alone, who built financial security from nothing, who survived the loss of her husband and the challenges of aging, did not need to tolerate psychological abuse from anyone, even her own daughter. The strength that carried me through decades of challenges was strong enough to carry me through this final test. The holiday table I set this year reflects my new understanding of what matters most. The good china still comes out, because beauty and tradition have value. The family recipes still anchor the meal, because continuity connects us to those we have loved and lost. But the conversation flows more freely, the laughter feels more genuine, and the gratitude expressed feels deeper and more authentic. Michael brings stories from his job and updates on Emma's activities. David shares plans for his wedding and dreams for his future with Lisa. We talk about books we have read, places we want to travel, projects we are working on. No one questions my memory or comments on my judgment. No one documents our conversation or probes for signs of decline. We simply enjoy each other's company as equals, as family members who choose to be together because we value the connection. When I look around this smaller table, I see reflections of the values I tried to instill in my children: honesty, integrity, respect for others, and the courage to stand up for what is right. Michael and David learned those lessons and lived them daily. Jennifer learned them too, but somewhere along the way, fear and greed overwhelmed the principles I had taught her. The tragedy of Jennifer's choices extends beyond our individual relationship to what she has taught her own children. Tyler and Brandon learned that family relationships are conditional, that love can be withdrawn when financial interests are threatened, that elders are problems to be managed rather than people to be honored. These lessons will shape their own relationships and their own approach to aging parents someday, but perhaps they will also learn from the consequences of their mother's choices. Perhaps they will understand that the grandmother they lost was not confused or incompetent, but rather strong enough to protect herself from those who would exploit her. Perhaps they will choose differently when they face their own family challenges. As I write these final thoughts, winter sunlight streams through my kitchen window, illuminating the same space where this journey began with such pain and humiliation. The room looks identical, but the woman who inhabits it has been transformed by fire into something stronger and clearer than she was before. I am no longer the mother who would sacrifice anything for her children's approval. I am no longer the woman who would accept disrespect disguised as concern. I am no longer the elder who believes that aging requires surrendering autonomy to those who claim to know better. I am Kathleen Reed, 74 years old, sharp as ever, and more confident in my own worth than I have ever been. I am a survivor of elder abuse who chose to fight back rather than submit. I am proof that family love must be mutual to be meaningful, that respect cannot be demanded but must be earned, and that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see your value. The roses in my garden bloom again this spring, tended by hands that have learned to protect what they nurture, and in their beauty, I see the reflection of a life well lived, well defended, and still flourishing despite those who tried to diminish it. That is the real victory. Not just surviving Jennifer's betrayal, but thriving in spite of it. Building a life of meaning and purpose that honors my own worth while helping others discover theirs. The daughter who tried to convince me I was losing myself inadvertently helped me find the strongest, truest version of who I was meant to be. And for that unexpected gift, born from the ashes of betrayal, I find myself strangely grateful. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.